Welcome to Spotlight on Jackson County, folks. This is a very exciting show, and the pre-taping conversation that I've had with our guest today is just uplifted me. It made me so excited. We are very lucky to have with us today Representative Brandon Jones, State Representative. Brandon, we were talking before this all got started, at length I might add, folks, about this trip that you've just come back from. And I read a short little bit in the newspaper about it, but it just didn't cover the depth that you're relating to us here. It's amazing.
First, it's great to see you, and we had a little bit of catching up to do on a personal level anyway. So it's good to be here. Always a pleasure to stop by. Yeah, this was a tremendous trip. I just got back from a fellowship that was sponsored by the German Marshall Fund of the United States, and they sent 15 Americans into 6 countries over the course of 24 days. And as we discussed, it was an extremely in-depth study of European economies, European history, and the whole purpose was to try to engender some kind of transatlantic relationship and understanding. This German Marshall Fund was established based on a gift from Germany to the United States in commemoration of the Marshall Plan, which of course was the plan to rebuild Europe. And the idea behind the gift, and the real idea I think behind the program itself, is to make sure that something like World War II never happens again, to try to make sure that we're having meaningful dialogue with our allies, to learn as much as we can about each other, so that we can be good partners, whether that means as a matter of defense or economically. And we have a lot to learn from one another. And so they sent us out into 6 countries, and as we were discussing, just an outstanding time, really unbelievable.
But you had some really neat access to a lot of individuals over there. Could you tell us something about that?
Absolutely. It blew me away, the access that this program had to people who were parliamentarians, or excuse me, members of the parliament in virtually all of these countries, cabinet members. You know, we discussed, I had a meeting with one of President Sarkozy of France's #1 advisors, the person who helped to draft the pension reform bill that has been the cause of all of these riots, the shift in retirement from 60 to 62, which seems really wild to us as Americans.
Of course, that's our age, 62.
Right. And I have no expectation of stopping work before I'm 70, so the idea that people would be, you know, up in arms about 60 to 62 was strange to me. But it was very exciting to sit down and talk with the person who helped to draft that, and who had been a major part, who had played a major part in helping to see it through. That's one example. Met with Lee Feinstein, the American ambassador to Poland, who was able to sit back and spend 30 to 45 minutes just talking to us very candidly about what his job entails and what the art of diplomacy looks like in a place like Poland, who has been such a major ally of ours through NATO and virtually every major defense initiative that we've had over the last decade. And then to sit down and talk to a lady in Warsaw who is in charge of their women's organization that is dealing with domestic violence. It was interesting. She and I spent an hour and a half together. That was a visit that I asked for since I have done some work with domestic violence. And she was able to take me through issue by issue some of the challenges that she is facing in terms of educating the general public on the problems that domestic violence poses for women and families. And I told her we could be having this conversation in Pascagoula, because many of the problems that you're facing are nearly identical to the problems and challenges that we're facing in combating this issue. And it was just meeting after meeting along those lines with people who are working on issues, you know, amidst a difficult economy and with other challenges.
Yeah, but it was kind of like a whirlwind trip. You had a lot of places to go in a short period of time.
Yeah.
He was describing that he finally saw the Eiffel Tower go by when he was in a cab at night in Paris, France.
Yeah,
so,
first time in Paris, we're in a meeting. We were there for 4 or 5 days, and the meetings typically ran from about 8 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night, and my opportunity to see the Eiffel Tower came in a taxi van as we went by it. So I'll have to, I think the idea is to get you kind of interested in these places so that you come back and do some of that stuff on your own. But during the time that they had us, they wanted to make sure that we were getting a full introduction into the political and economic world of these different countries. And naturally, I don't want to overstate it. You can't get a sense of a place in 4 or 5 days. You're just getting some of the basic information. But as someone who was a history major, someone who really grew up captivated by the fall of the Berlin Wall and the economic rise of Germany, the European Union and its formation, it was pretty humbling to find out within a few hours of going through this program how little I knew and how much I have to learn about these different places. So it was quite an education that they pack into 24 days.
Well, I can remember when it was built, so that's kind of telling my age.
Yeah. Well, you've seen it from...
I've seen it when it was built, and I've seen it when it came down. So,
right.
And what a moment in history that was. And speaking of moments in history, you were telling me about your tour of Auschwitz.
That's right. You know, I think that any of us who have a passing understanding of World War II remember the prison camps, and whether it's Dachau, Auschwitz, Birkenau, and just the great image that is of human depravity and how so many terrible things came together at one time in these places. And naturally, I've seen movies, I've read books, I've had an opportunity to visit the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem and the one in Washington, D.C., and so I felt going into this that I had some frame of reference as we were going to tour the prison camp, and I realized very quickly that was not the case. There is really nothing that prepares you to delve into that moment in history. It's such a dark moment. There were 5 of us at this particular stop, and we were very fortunate to have the guidance of a historian there at the facility who was able to take us through it and to give us a little bit of context, a little bit of a frame of reference. And as we were discussing, there were moments that it was just very hard to put in order. There were places that we were seeing where such awful acts had taken place that it was very difficult to really get a handle on. And so I thought that the words of our guide were very helpful. He encouraged us to not think of this as a fixed historical point and not to think of it as something that we as humans have conquered or moved on from, but rather to look at moments like this as learning opportunities to make sure that we're doing all that we can in our personal lives to see that moments like this never happen again, and to recognize that there are some terrible things going on in the world even now that we can have a hand in. And I thought that was extremely helpful because frankly, when you look at a place like Auschwitz in its totality and you take that in, it can really be an overwhelming moment. It was just such a terrible event. So I found that type of insight very helpful.
Well, this conversation that we had even before the camera started rolling, folks, it's just been so insightful for me. And tell us about some of the other places. You went to Spain. We
did. We had a great opportunity to meet with the vice president of the Spanish Senate, who was an old warhorse of Spanish politics and had seen just about everything that you could see. And Spain is one of those countries, along with Greece, within the European Union, who is facing an enormous economic challenge right now. And Spain, while we were there, was in the process of cobbling together their budget. And we were lucky because we met with members of Parliament and the Senate as they were agreeing on the final budget figures. And it was actually during our meeting with the Vice President that an alarm went off telling members to go to the chamber and vote. And so he rushed out of there. We got to kind of see that in action. And it's interesting in Spain, and I don't know if we're going to get this over in Mississippi. In Spain, you have a set period of time to enter the chamber to vote. Once the bell is completed its ring, the doors are locked, and each member is levied a fine of 500 euros if they're not in there to vote. So pretty punitive on their members who don't show up. I don't know how my colleagues would appreciate that kind of strong arming at the Mississippi House.
You're right. I don't know if that's going to happen in Mississippi.
But they settled on a budget while we were there, and you know, as a state representative that's about to be a part of a budget process here in our state, it was very interesting to watch something like the Spanish Senate take on budget and what all that meant. We also met with who is essentially the governor for the province that Madrid is located in, met with different political parties. We toured news organizations in France, the largest television news organization in France, and the largest radio news organization in Madrid, and met with one of the largest newspapers in southwestern Germany while we were in a place called Freiburg. And so had an opportunity to meet with various journalists from all different mediums in different countries about the different issues. And journalists are a really good source of information because unlike politicians who can sometimes be guarded and a little bit hesitant to tell you what's really happening, journalists don't typically have that problem. And especially when you get them in an opportunity where they're off the record and able to tell you what's going on, you can really get some really good insight into what's happening in these places. So just quite an immersion. It really was.
Yeah, I read you were glad to get home and get some regular food. I'm sure that you were exposed to not only different ways of government and parliament, but you're also exposed to different cuisine on all of these areas that you went to.
We were. And you know, I am not a picky eater. I loved every meal we had. I mean, I'm kind of like that. I was ready to get back and get a Diet Coke and some barbecue. That's just my nature. But they did keep us in meetings, but they did feed us well. I guess they figure if you're going to keep people in 12 hours worth of meetings a day, you may as well throw some food at them. So we ate well. And I didn't know what to expect in, you know, some of these places, but there were 6 countries. I was in: Belgium, Germany, Spain, France, Switzerland, Poland. And we were introduced to the different flavors of each of those places, and I was, you know, I didn't leave a whole lot on my plate at any of those places. It was good.
Speaking of Poland, you had a very interesting observation about Warsaw, and you know, you and I related real well to that because, you know, you see all these documentaries about Warsaw in World War II, and there was a Warsaw uprising against the Germans, and Hitler made it a point to punish them for that, and he made it a point to absolutely raze it to the ground. I mean, just destroy it. And you were telling me that it's come back just absolutely beautiful.
Poland blew me away. I had a very fixed picture of what I thought Poland was. It was very much steeped in those old, grainy photos that come out of what you were just describing, the siege of Warsaw and the 1,000-mile walks across Poland to the concentration camps, and those images that you have that are very sad and cold and remote. Krakow and Warsaw, and we had the opportunity to take a 5-hour train ride between the two. Beautiful, just absolutely beautiful places. And Warsaw has rebuilt. I mean, this is a place that was leveled. This is a place where people were escaping through the sewage system. They have rebuilt nearly brick for brick in the old town. And so you're able to go back and see these places that were destroyed by the Nazis. And it's a testament to the spirit of these people. First of all, the uprising itself is one of these little-known moments in history that is really just a testament to how willing to fight these people were for their own concept of liberty and how resistant they were to what the Nazis were up to. But then to come back after that, where I believe 75% of the city center was destroyed and 75% of its population was killed, for them to come back from that and to rebuild, you know, I think you said it before. It's a sign, it's a signal that we're not giving into this, and I think that's exactly right. I think that's how they see it. And so to be a part of that, and then even in more recent history, you know, it's only recently that Poland has really been able to establish democracy. And so there is a political figure there who I had a chance to meet, who has served in the parliament, who has served in the cabinet, who was imprisoned during the more totalitarian period of their history, and who has become something of a hero, you know, here in recent days. And I was sitting next to him in this restaurant in Warsaw, and of course he's telling me these stories of his political history and some of the things that he's experienced in his lifetime. And I started to notice people are looking over there in the restaurant. Well, I knew they didn't care anything about the representative from South Mississippi. I knew this guy must be some major player. So I learned as we get through the night that this is a major political hero for Poland, and who has a big part of their rise to democracy. And so, you know, it's very hard to encapsulate in a newspaper story some of what was going on this trip, but it was meetings like that almost on a daily basis.
And almost an hourly basis.
Yeah, almost hourly, sure.
I tell you what, this show is so important. We're going to roll right through that mid-break, and we're going to keep on going because we want to get to the budget in Mississippi. That's coming up, and we're hearing some pretty bad things, but in talking to you, Brandon, I have a little bit more hope that things won't be as bad as the news media is putting the spin on.
I think we, as members of the legislature, when we talk about the budget, it's always a smart political strategy to make it sound as horrible as possible. That way, if there's any good to it at all, we've given ourselves some wiggle room. So I'm kind of letting you behind the curtain here on that one. But the reason that I think there is cause for Mississippians to be optimistic is really twofold. Number one, we have a history of very conservative budget planning. We can talk about wild expenditures and throwing money at this or that. I would defy anyone to show me where that happens in Mississippi. We have one of the smallest operating budgets in the entire country, and we manage it pretty well. Sure, there are things that are left unattended that we wish we did better, but by and large, we have been very prudent, very frugal with the money that we've had. And so it's put us in a better financial position than some of our sister states. But secondly, the hard-line reason for optimism is for the last several months, we've hit our budget estimates. And that's something that hardly happened at all during 2009. And so it's a big deal for us to look for those small indicators that seem to mean that we're starting to see a slow end to the recession. And so we're starting to hit our budget estimates. We're starting to see unemployment creep down, even here in Jackson County. And so my hope is that we'll continue to build off of that momentum and recover, here in the next couple years. Now, having said all that, there are going to be more cuts this year. I've talked to our local educators. I've talked to people who are doing mental health. I've talked to people who are fully aware of the budgeting process, and they are prepared for further cuts because we just have not recovered yet. Although there are those signs and causes for optimism, we still are in a very difficult place. And in order to facilitate a quicker rebound, it's going to be necessary that we do some more of those, make some more of those hard decisions. And so you'll see more of that. But I think there's reason for Mississippians to be somewhat hopeful about the future, that we are beginning to see a little glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. And I've been encouraged to hear from people who are working in public education or who are working in health, who seem to understand the budget situation that we're in and seem to be willing to roll up their sleeves and try to make it work. We just want to do it with as little cost to jobs as possible and with as little cost to families as possible, and try to maintain those basic level of services so that we can get through this without anything cataclysmic happening, and see if maybe in a couple years we can't start to weather this.
One of the real big things that a lot of people on the coast are extremely concerned with. That's the cost of insurance. We have seen catastrophic increases in our homeowners insurance since Hurricane Katrina. Is there anything that can be done? Is there somebody that's working on this? Congressman Taylor was trying to do something. Of course, he's not going to be there, but is there something that can be done to help the resident? You're a resident of the coast. You probably know this just as well as I do, and I'm sure you're not immune to insurance cost increases.
No, I'm
you're just like everybody else. I mean,
I'm in the state wind pool, and grappling with the homeowners policies and the flood policies. But this is a problem that was really punctuated by Katrina, and that has been too long in getting to some type of relief. And it's a problem that I wake up thinking about and go to sleep thinking about as vice chairman of the insurance committee. And so we spend a lot of time trying to create an environment where insurance companies feel comfortable writing policies here, and where once they are writing policies here, they are fair to their policyholders. And that's been an uphill battle for Mississippi. Because we are such a small state and represent such a small portion of the business that many of these companies are writing, they can write us out of their business plan if they choose to. And insurance companies are only regulated on the state level, so there's nothing that keeps them from entering into a market or leaving it except for whatever that state is doing with respect to its laws. And so we walk a tightrope of trying to protect homeowners and make sure that those policies mean what they say they mean, while at the same time encouraging new companies to come into the market. Now, what we have seen recently is a few new companies begin to enter the market and write policies. That is crucial. That is going to be a game changer for us. We're not going to see the real relief that we need until more companies are writing policies and those rates start getting competitive again. In the meantime, we're trying to fund the state wind pool, which is the insurer of last resort, but has increasingly become the insurer of only resort in places where the big companies dare not go. And so we have to keep that stable while we weather this storm and try to get these companies back. One of the things that we're looking to do, and that our insurance commissioner, Mike Chaney, has been helpful in leading the discussion on, is to look at a multi-state approach, one where we put together those of us who live in high velocity zones here in Mississippi with the same type of people in Louisiana, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all the way up to the coast of Maine, because as we saw this last hurricane season, the Northeast is not immune from storms. And the idea would be kind of like the model we have with the state wind pool, to see if we couldn't spread some of that exposure out, draw down the rates a little bit. In order to get there, we're going to need insurance commissioners to give up a little bit of power. We're going to need states to be willing to work together. And there's no reason we shouldn't do it. I mean, there's really no magic to crossing the Mississippi line into Louisiana. They've got insurance problems. We've got insurance problems. We need to be working together to get to a solution. And so I've thrown a lot at you there, but the idea is let's attract private companies and let's think outside of the box, because things aren't going to get better just by virtue of us sitting here. And so we're trying to think, well, how do we pool our resources together and get other states on board? We're starting to see that discussion take place. But it's hard sometimes for government to think like business. That's an innovative business model. And as I say, it would take governments to be willing to kind of give up a little bit of control and work together in order to make that happen. But those are some of the things on the horizon, and I hope we get there soon.
I spoke, as a matter of fact, to the Retired Educators Association today, and when they found out I worked here, and they said, if you ever get State Representative Brandon Jones on the show again, and I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'll see him this afternoon at 3 o'clock. They said, well, ask him this question. They're very concerned with something that they've heard in this last political campaign. The state is looking to cut the 13th check from their retirement.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, there are attempts to curtail the benefits that are available to our state employees every year. And you'll see that this year. You'll see people make proposals, and you'll see people posture in that way. What I try to remind people of that are out in the general public that may not be a state employee is that we have some of the most wonderful people in this state who are working for the state and who are doing these government jobs. If you look at what we pay as compared to other states, there's really no comparison. We don't pay our state employees nearly what they would get for doing the same job in other states. And so because these jobs are so important, because education is such a big deal, and that's our number one economic development tool is the education of our young people, and because delivering health care and building roads and all the variety of things we ask our state to do, because those jobs are vital, I think it's important that we protect the people who do them. And in many cases, you're talking about classroom teachers, firefighters, police officers, folks that we call upon to do some of the most important jobs we have out there to do. And so at the same time that I don't have a stomach for raising taxes, and I don't have the stomach to just grow government to some unforeseen new level, I don't have the stomach to take away from some of our hardest working employees their benefits. Those are part of the things that they negotiate whenever they go into work. It's part of what drives them into work at a place like Mississippi anyway. And so the idea of rating those now is just not very tenable to me. Now, having said that, we're always looking for opportunities to cut waste. We don't want to have government duplicating services. We don't want to have 3 people doing the job that one person can do. And so we're always going to be looking for ways to become more lean and to take a more business-like approach to the way that we do government. But this political ploy of let's take this out and it's going to solve all of our economic problems, that's wrong-headed, and it winds up unduly scaring people who are, locked into the system in some way. So, you don't want to say never, and I don't want to say that there aren't people out there who feel differently than I do about that issue. But I feel very strongly that our teachers and our firefighters and our police officers, that we should really work to protect their benefits, because we stand the risk of losing them to other states and to other jobs if we can't give them some minimal level of employment. And so I hope we don't go down that path. I'll be working to see that we don't, and I'll tell my teacher friends that next time I go out to Barn Hills and meet with them.
Please do. And you heard it, folks. I asked him the question for you, and you heard his answer. I don't think you got anything to worry about. We got about 1 minute left. It has gone by so fast.
It's been good.
Yes. Anything you want to leave them with?
Well, it's just a great honor to have this position. I don't take anything for granted about doing this job. I look at it as a service opportunity, a chance to give back to a community that's been wonderful to me. And so I'm very grateful to be the state representative for House District 111. And every time I'm here, or every time I talk to any group, I encourage people to reach out to me. My cell phone number is 326-7649. I hope people will call it. I have an office on Magnolia Street, have an open door policy.